Okay, everyone, welcome to episode 2 of Wine and Song, where I will be talking about a very underrated album from a very popular band or artist, and pairing that with a Virginia wine. And first of all, just very briefly, I want to get this out of the way. I'm doing these videos myself, solo. These are video selfies, if you will. And I don't have any high-tech equipment. I don't have any highfalutin microphones or lights or anything really fancy. I have no gaffer. I have no key grip. It's just me and my little portable Toshiba combination still camera and video camera, which right now I've adjusted the settings on it, and I've got a blinding light staring me right in the eye, so I apologize. Well, we'll have to make do with that. But anyway, I want to talk today about another album and pair it with a Virginia wine. And in celebration of this particular album, it's turning 50 this year, the year being 2017. I'm not talking about Sgt. Pepper's. I'm talking about another album that came several months after Sgt. Pepper's, and I'm not talking about the Beatles either, but I'm talking about a band that was very influential on the Beatles and vice versa. They basically had a very friendly rivalry. One band is the Beatles, being from the UK, the other band being from the US. Okay, anybody know yet? Anybody with a passing interest in music from the past, the classic era of rock and roll, which, as I defined earlier, 1963 to 1997 or so. That's just my opinion. Everybody's entitled to their own, but that's my opinion of when rock and roll really peaked, or when the classic era. Okay, so anyway, I'm talking about the Beach Boys, and Pet Sounds came out in 1966, and just a little bit of a background of Pet Sounds. That album, Brian Wilson was very much influenced by the Rubber Soul album that the Beatles did, which came out earlier in 1966. So the Beach Boys created Pet Sounds, and the Beatles were blown away by Pet Sounds, especially Paul McCartney. So they made Sgt. Pepper in response to Pet Sounds. So that started this rivalry back and forth. And then the Beach Boys responded to Sgt. Pepper by creating this album called Smile, which, if you know anything about the Beach Boys or anything about rock and roll history and the legacies behind rock and roll, if you've seen the movie that came out a couple of years ago about Brian Wilson, you are familiar with what Smile is all about. That album was never released until, I think, 2009 or so. It was finally released just to cash in. I hate to say it, I hate to be cynical there, but it was a money grab because the Smile album really wasn't meant to be. They put out an album of material from the Smile album that was meant to be on the Smile album. That album was called Smiley Smile. That came out in early 1967. And it had Good Vibrations on it, which wasn't meant to be on the Smile album to begin with, because Good Vibrations was only a single. Okay, are you confused yet? All right, that's just a summing up of the rivalry between the Beach Boys and the Beatles. Later in 1967, I think it was November or December, the Beach Boys put out another album that came on the heels of Smiley Smile, which was the replacement for Smile. Okay, a little bit of summary there. That album was called Wild Honey, and I'm wearing currently my best Brian Wilson attire, my most tropical shirt that I could find in my collection with a bunch of pineapples on it. I've got boat shoes on, okay, because, you know, the Beach Boys were avid sailors, and of course they loved to surf and all that stuff. Brian Wilson, by the way, was not a surfer. He was afraid to surf. He had a lot of issues, but I digress. He is, and was especially, he's still making music. His voice isn't quite all there anymore, but he's still making music. But at his peak, I would say between Pet Sounds in 1966 to his nervous breakdown that happened in 1969 or 70 or so, he was the guru of the Beach Boys. He was a composer that even his contemporaries like Tom Petty and Lindsey Buckingham and Paul McCartney and you name them, they put Brian Wilson right up there with Beethoven, believe it or not. It sounds really presumptuous, but that's what they said. So anyway, Wild Honey came out in 1967. I actually have this on vinyl. This is a vinyl copy, and it's a little controversial because this album was made in mono. It was a mono release. It was not put out in stereo. And several years ago, they started working on stereo remasters of the Beach Boys' classic era albums, and they omitted Wild Honey from that batch of remastering in stereo. And the legend has it, the original tapes that this album was recorded on had degenerated so badly that there's not much left to the tape, so they couldn't really do a stereo remaster. But I have heard rumors that they are working on some sort of stereo thing. It's all over the internet. If you are into the Beach Boys, and I am, but I'm not a fanatical Beach Boys person, I just like music in general. But if you're a Beach Boys fanatic, you can find a plethora of information about the Beach Boys and their legacy and conspiracy theories and everything you can imagine. And one of the latest is that they are going to put out, in fact, another version of Wild Honey that is going to be in some sort of a semblance of stereo. It may not be 100% stereo, but it's going to be something. But anyway, this is Wild Honey. And very colorful album that matched the era very well, because I'm talking about the artwork on the cover here. The album came out in late 1967, but it really belonged in the summer, or the spring, because it's full of a lot of springy, summery songs. And of course, that's what the Beach Boys were known for. Wild Honey was a single from the album, as was Darlin'. Darlin' was considered to be a real kind of throwback to the earlier Beach Boys hits, like I Get Around and Little Deuce Coupe and that sort of stuff. Coming in the wake of Smiley Smile and then Pet Sounds before that, Darlin' was sort of a return to form for the classic Mike Love era Beach Boys that most Americans are familiar with. The material that the Beach Boys put out after Pet Sounds, I want to add this, the albums they put out between 1967, which is Smiley Smile era, to probably 1971 or 72, all of those albums, and there's not enough time to get into all of them right now, but those albums didn't sell anything in the United States. They were complete bombs in the US, because in that era of rock and roll, people weren't interested in the Beach Boys. They were interested in later day period Beatles, they were interested in the Rolling Stones, they were interested in Jimi Hendrix, they were interested in the Doors, they were interested in the real psychedelic stuff. And even though this cover may look a little psychedelic, the music inside was more traditional Beach Boys, including Darlin', which was a top 20 hit, and the single Wild Honey, which also hit the top 40 somewhere. I think it stalled at number 35. But it's a really interesting album, and it's got some of Brian Wilson's most underrated songs on it, including Let the Wind Blow, which is almost like classical music, and it's far surpasses anything from Smiley Smile. And I'm going to probably irritate a lot of diehard Brian Wilson fans out there, but this album, if Smile, and I had heard Smile when it finally came out in 2009 or so, I heard what was meant to be the Smile project, and I wasn't really blown away by it. It was, it seemed, I can see why they shelved it. It just didn't seem to work for me. This album works for me and works for a lot of other people, and they should have really concentrated on this album, because it's got some great songs on it, and it's got some good songs, and it's got a couple of songs I feel unfinished. For some reason, for the 1967 output of the Beach Boys, they are focusing on Smiley Smile more than Wild Honey, probably because Smile and Smiley Smile were, the tapes were taken care of. They did not degrade as poorly as the tapes for this. So anyway, enough of that. I'm not going to play any tracks, again, copyright issues, but if you YouTube Wild Honey by the Beach Boys, or look them up on Spotify or Pandora, you will hear some really good music. This, by the way, is a copy from England. This album, I got it at a used record store, and it was pressed in the UK, so it's EMI. EMI was, of course, the parent company of Capitol Records, so that accounts for the EMI logo. So anyway, we're going to pair this album with a wine, and even though it may sound like I've already started partaking in this wine, I have not. It's only about noon, and I don't start drinking that early. I'm not that bad, at least not yet. The wine we're going to pair this album to is a Riesling, which is a good summer wine. It's a Riesling from Virginia, and it comes in a blue bottle. a lot of the Rieslings from Germany and also the United States, like upstate New York, they come in blue bottles. It's sort of like just the way people like to, a lot of winemakers like to package wine, Rieslings, in blue bottles, because it usually marks a slightly sweeter wine or an off-dry wine. And this is a Riesling from a winery called Cave Ridge Vineyards, which is in the Shenandoah Valley. It's actually between, it's north of Harrisonburg, right off 81. It's got signs right off of 81. You can find it just by driving down 81. You'll see an exit sign for it. I think it's around the town of Mount Jackson, if you're familiar with that stretch of 81 in the Shenandoah Valley. I think it's around there. Anyway, it's a wonderful winery. It's up on a hill, and it's actually surrounded by areas that are caves and caverns. They're not open to the public, of course, but there are a lot of, being where they are in the middle of the Allegheny mountain chain, they have a lot of caves and caverns up there. So they named this wine because near the winery there is a cave, and they have found some fossils in that cave that are used actually for their logos. So this is a Riesling. It's an off-dry style, but I'm not a big sweet wine drinker. The fact that I bought it, basically I'm able to stomach it, so it's not that sweet. It's a little bit touch of sweetness, but it's labeled as just a regular Riesling, not a dry Riesling. So it's got notes of, the usual suspects when it comes to Riesling. It's got, I would say, a little bit of honey to go with wild honey, but also a little bit of lemon zest. It's a perfect summer wine. You chill this stuff and it drinks itself. Cave Ridge Winery, it's up there, like I said, in the Shenandoah Valley. This is 12% alcohol, which is a good alcohol level for the summertime. And since I vowed to make these video clips not very long, I will wrap it up. And I hope you enjoy Riesling, whether it's from Cave Ridge or any other winery of your choice, and then check out Wild Honey. Brian Wilson thanks you.